Hey, so I decided to do things a little bit differently today, and that's primarily because I'm like really super passionate. I'm going to use the word passionate. I'm really passionate. And I titled this thing, so there's this thing called the truth. Okay, there's this thing called problem solving, and there's this thing called a gap. And what I'm getting at is I've had it up to here with a gap in the lack of communication in the medical community. I'm just going to say it that way. The lack of communication in the medical community, I've had it with that. And the reason I'm getting at this is because I work with a lot of parents with children living with autism and who get diagnosed with, this particular one was early onset puberty. And so now we're at 6. And so now we're looking at endocrinologist reports, and they're doing blood tests. And, what I do is I actually close the gap. So a little bit about me. When I was a little girl, I loved mysteries. Loved solving mysteries. And so whenever there's this missing piece of, I always like to go find it. I don't need the box, if you will, to put the picture together. So in this case, this child was diagnosed with, I forget the clinical term, but it is basically early onset puberty. And they were running tests to test the gonadotropin release hormone. And when I was looking into this, that particular hormone is a signaling molecule. It's a signaling molecule. And what it does is it communicates via the MAPK pathway, which is that's the pathway that actually communicates directly to the DNA, and it notifies the DNA to begin producing hormones for puberty. Okay, so so that we already see that part. But the point I'm getting at is that other research is indicating that this particular gonadotropin hormone is also that they can actually influence receptor activity in cancer treatment. So this tells me that gonadotropins are doing more than just signaling luteinizing hormones and follicle stimulating hormones and so forth, okay? But the question really begins with what is activating this? And not to bore you with all the details, but the bottom line is cortisol. So now here's yet another gap. So scientists know this, but it's not being communicated, or it's certainly not being acknowledged or recognized in the general community. Because what's going to happen next is they're going to want to put this child on some form of medication, and she's already dealing with autism, but here's the genetic complex that gets involved with that is also indicated. It's a neurotropic factor. It's a neurotropic factor in the brain, so that means it actually has influence over various neurochemicals. And yet when I pointed out that all of this is related to the stress response, an active stress response, what ultimately came back was, if you're saying this is cortisol related, I've already had the cortisol test done, and their blood tests were coming back within normal ranges. I'm not exasperated with the mother. Not at all. I love her dearly. So please understand that this has nothing to do with her. This has everything to do with the medical community, because the bottom line is neurochemicals. A lot of them work both intracellularly and extracellularly. And cortisol, so these blood tests don't necessarily let you know. They don't necessarily indicate, if you really can't tell whether you don't know what they're doing in the cells. Just going to put it that way. You don't know what they're doing in the cells. So the blood tests are technically they're not helpful. They really don't tell us what's going on with cortisol in this case. And a good example is when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and they tested my vitamin D levels, and my vitamin D levels were really, basically, kind of like a lot of us, and which was surprising. Actually it was during the middle of the winter, so I'm not really surprised at that point. And all of this is epigenetics, by the way. This is all epigenetics. So anyway, Sorry, there's a message that just flashed on my screen. So anyway, they wanted to put me on vitamin D. They wanted to boost my blood serum levels. Okay, well, there's a couple of things about vitamin D. Number one, it's a hormone. Number two, not only do we need to produce it, we need to be able to use it, and we need to get it into the cells. Sorry, I'm not poking at you. It's just that my screen turns itself off. So we actually has to be transported into the cells. So vitamin D is also an intracellular hormone. And if the VDR, which is the vitamin D receptor, is not working properly or has been deactivated or altered in any way due to, guess what, cortisol, you're not getting vitamin D into the cells. So the point I learned that several years ago. So this tells me that a lot of neurochemicals work both outside the cell and inside the cell, like I said a little while ago. Glutamate is another really super example. It has extracellular activities, and it also has intracellular activities. So gonadotropin is one of those that it's one of those ones, it's a signaling molecule, and like I said, it communicates via the MAPK pathway. This is intracellular, okay? So when we talk about this being related to cortisol levels, we're talking about cortisol being intracellular. And I actually found a study, in order to back up what I was saying, that on metabolic syndrome. And now it was actually published in the Diabetes Medical Journal, and yet the whole purpose of the study was to understand cortisol, the intracellular activity of cortisol. And they were able to determine that high levels, this is what actually leads to obesity. So metabolic syndrome is obviously in line with a number of health issues. And in this case, they discovered that cortisol is intracellular within the adipose tissue, fat tissue, and it is regenerated there. It's regenerated there. So you now can have higher levels of cortisol that are not detectable in the blood. Okay, and so the whole point of the vitamin D was when I confronted my doctor and I said, so how do you know if I take this, it's actually going to get into the cells? And her direct response to me, and this was between 3 doctors, my general physician and 2 of my oncologists, and all 3 of them said, we don't know. We can't tell. So there you have it. There's no way to be able to test intracellular levels of any of these chemicals. So in theory, I'm going on strong confidence actually. These blood tests that we're looking at a lot of the times are not an accurate picture of what's really happening in the system, which means now we need to be understanding, and this is where I get really excited for the fact that I can actually provide people, and I provided this mom, and I'm actually formulating some things for her daughters, but this is all related. I mean, I've seen all of this time and time again with autism, and so not the early onset puberty. I've seen self-harm. I've seen a lot. I've seen excessive weight gain. I have seen a lot of this kind of thing happening, and we can, especially after the last couple of years of deep investigation, it is possible because plant constituents in the oils actually also communicate via the MAPK pathway. And that would be acetylation and phosphorylation. And there are very specific constituents that I'm actually going to package up right now in a very special blend and ship it off. Because why? Because we can offset this gonadotropin that is telling the DNA we need this child to kick it up a notch. Because it's basically rapid aging is what's happening. And that is a stress response. Okay? And what I mean by stress response, just to be clear, it's just an activation of different chemistry. Okay, it's just an activation of different chemistry. And how this works is it's necessary for number one. It's necessary for the protection. It's also necessary for the reproduction. Okay, so menstrual cycle activates the stress response. Okay, so sleep will cause adjustments to the stress response because this is also via the MAPK pathway. So this is a very significant process. And again, depending on the body's needs, it will communicate to the DNA and tell the DNA you need to do something about this. And this is why we have oxidative stress. But when we're not managing the way we react to our thoughts emotionally, we perpetuate this. And with autism and other neurodiversities, are highly sensitive people. We'll just say it that way. We don't need a diagnosis or a label. Highly sensitive people will pick up on what other people are putting off. And that's a whole nother video, because we are emitting these chemicals and they're picking up on it. And so the idea here is to begin to self-regulate, one, for our own health and well-being, as well as if we have children that are on the neurodiverse spectrum, we need to be able to teach them how to self-regulate and also be mindful of what they're picking up on, because our concerns about their health and their well-being, which are completely understandable and embraceable, is actually affecting them. And I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong. And on that note, there's one other thing I wanted to say. I am really excited. I'm putting together just a phenomenal audio summit that will be coming out in August. And what I want to say to that is it's going to involve generational trauma. And before you click off, before you go away, this is not a woke statement. Okay, this is not somebody that's just coming forward because it sounds, no, this is actually, we've been able to determine that trauma, whether it be famine, fire, it doesn't make any difference throughout history, throughout our family line. Okay, in my case, my family came to this country for religious freedom. They were Hungarian Jews, and they were basically running for their lives. There was a lot of secrets, there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of, there was a lot of shit going on. So it makes sense that they're actually been able to determine that this is showing up in the genes from generation to generation. These are not genetic defects. This is just a processing system. The DNA is like a computer chip. It's recording everything, and it's a processing system that is being passed forward. And this is why I advocate for essential oils, and why I am advocating that we begin on a daily basis, because what's happening is our DNA is being overrun with other chemicals, even from the outside. Okay, not necessarily our stress levels, but just chemicals that we're introducing to the system. And so I'm here to teach people how to protect their system and the lineage of generational trauma from and you're probably wondering, how does that happen? Well, it's a communication with the DNA. Okay, we have to be willing and able to override that communication. And that is the reason why we have these plant essences at our fingertips. And learning how to personalize their use for you is really necessary. It's absolutely necessary. And especially because then we get to teach our kids how to do this. Imagine our children facing a healthier, brighter future. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I'm sorry if I've pissed anybody off. That's not my intention, but the fact is on the table. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. There's a lack of communication, and it's being cast out as that the body's weak and defective, and it's not weak and defective. It's actually there's information being communicated via the cells that we are not aware of. And it's not a joke, and it's not woo-woo, okay? It's not, this is real science. And the fact is that this emotional pain that we feel is in fact contributing to all physical pain. And so when it comes to our children, I really want us to understand how we can actually, like I said, override this. I feel like I'm babbling now. But there's a very special thing that we can do for them where it's at our fingertips. And so I'm going to invite you to, I'm starting every Wednesday at 3 Eastern on the Synergessence page. I'm going to do an aroma reset. I'm going to be on there for an hour, and I'll take your questions. You're welcome to message me your questions so that I can just address them. It would make it a lot easier that way. So DM me your questions, and that way I can directly answer them while we're there. Or feel free, if you don't get a chance to do that, feel free to come in and drop it into the comment box. That's the first invitation. The second one is I'm going to be doing another antioxidant thinking challenge the week of July 5th, but I'm going to hold it live on YouTube. If you want in on that, you can visit synergessence.com and go to my live events page, and you can register there. And I will provide you with all the information on how to be a part of that. And then, like I said, the summit, I will let you know when that's coming up. And I believe I'm going to do an essential oils masterclass towards the end of July, as I just haven't set the date yet. So just wanted you to know that. And in the meantime, like I said, what really fires me up is I love the sleuthing. I love the sleuthing because I don't want our kids to suffer. Because as our kids suffer, we suffer. When we suffer over them, they're suffering. So it becomes this cyclical thing. And my stand is that the parents don't need to suffer, and neither do our children today or tomorrow. So I'd like to invite you to ask me your questions. And if I can assist you in any way with doing some research for you to kind of, because that's what I love to do. I love the research part. I love pulling things out, kind of like pulling them out of the sky and plugging them into the computer, and voila, the information is right there in front of me. And I'm happy to do that if that's something that you are looking for. Anyway, thank you so much, but just know that there's more to what's happening to us epigenetically, and we have the power to override it. You have my word. Thank you, be well, and I will see you hopefully tomorrow on Synergessence. Silence call.